We're going to continue this conversation about Huawei. In its first official response to the move, Huawei called it, quote, arbitrary and said its business would be impacted. Joining us right now to talk about it is Andy Purdy. He is Huawei's Technologies USA Chief Security Officer. Good morning to you. And what a 72 hours you must have had. As I see the challenge, and I think we all see the challenge for you, right now, the United States doesn't trust the Chinese government. There's a trust problem, and this pandemic has only made that trust problem worse. At the same time, Huawei is viewed inside the United States, rightly or wrongly, as being part and parcel of the Chinese government. And so the question is, how do you, Andy, how does Huawei separate itself to the degree it can, and this goes to the issue of transparency, effectively separate yourself and prove to the world stage that you are somehow completely and utterly independent from the Chinese government?
Well, there are really two things at work here, I believe. The first is these negative actions by the U.S. government, this most recent escalation, is going to impact American jobs much more than it's going to impact Huawei. We are prepared to discuss with the U.S. government measures that have been taken in a number of other countries, where we can implement policies, processes, and technologies so that we can prove that neither our products nor our employees are subject to the undue influence of the China government. And we can talk about some of the specifics that can be done, including independent testing, independent monitoring, that can achieve this result. And that's the fundamental thing, is to make sure that risk is addressed, and we're prepared to do that.
Andy, but I think the issue isn't so much necessarily that this can be solved with tests and independent auditors. I think this goes to a control issue. Who fundamentally has control of this company at any given point? And even if technically today the Chinese government is not using your services in ways that the U.S. government might think is nefarious or otherwise, that they could in the future, and that is ultimately what poses the biggest problem.
Well, I think there's no question that is the concern of the U.S. government. And as of about a year ago, and many more government officials were saying it's not about the company, it's about the country. And so my point is, while it sounds like a kind of techno speak to talk about the technologies that can be done, the issue of control, if we can prove, for example, that there are no backdoors in our products, then we can prove that the Chinese government didn't force us to put backdoors into the products. And secondly, if we can prove that our employees are not allowing access or sharing data, network or personal data from customers with China, we can prove that China is not forcing us to turn over data. So the question of control can be addressed regarding those two fundamental issues that the U.S. is worried about.
Let me ask you this. One of the things that the Commerce Secretary said on Friday was the idea that Huawei was continuing to use effectively U.S. IP in its products. How do you respond to that? The restrictions and the rules, we believe that we have been following quite closely. And so the U.S. in a number of measures, heightened by this most recent announcement of the new rule on Friday, are to further tighten what the rules are that we are forced to play in. And so we are complying, in our view, with the previous rules, and we will comply with this rule. And that's what's going to make it tough for us. And frankly, it's going to make it very difficult for the U.S. semiconductor industry. Let me ask you this. How would you feel if the Chinese government were to retaliate on your behalf against an American company like Apple?
I think escalation is one of the biggest things that we've been seeing in the last year and a half. And you see it in the tariffs, the tit for tat. Escalation is not a good thing. I strongly oppose the idea of putting restrictions on Apple's ability to do business in the United States or the ability of American companies to buy technologies from China. We have to talk about these issues. We can resolve these issues, and we should try to do it now rather than waiting 30 or 40 years from now and having huge economic impact on the United States as a result. It's unnecessary.
Well, let me ask you, you just said it's going to have a huge economic effect on the United States. How are you seeing that effect?
Well, the first part of it is you look at the entity list, the restrictions on the ability of Now it's about 150 American companies to sell to Huawei, and that will be exacerbated by this new foreign product rule. So we can't see the exact numbers, but the estimates using econometric models is that when you talk about the $12 billion a year on average that we buy from American companies, that translates to 40 or 50,000 American jobs. Last year, we spent a lot more, about 18 billion. But the projection going forward would be that about that amount. Right now, only 100 to 150 American companies have been given permission to sell to us, leaving, I think, about 150 companies that want to be able to sell to us. And so those jobs, if we're not allowed to buy American components, and our chairman early this morning reiterated that we want to be able to do that, we're going to be forced to go elsewhere. And it's going to take us some time to get to that point, and we'll be harmed as a result. And as you know, we were harmed about $12 billion last year because of this. We're going to be forced to go elsewhere, and the jobs aren't going to come back. You know, we won't be coming back later to American technologies, and American companies are not going to be able to sell those technologies to anyone else to make up the difference.